Hey guys, Chris here, and I'm a Ukrainian Canadian. Today is December 5th, 2023, and let's get to the news happening in Ukraine, shall we? Let's go to Avdiivka first, because I have some good news from Avdiivka, and the Institute of Study of War mentioned today that the Ukrainians were able to reverse some of the Russian gains in the last few days in the south of Stepove and bring the fight back into the coke plant. And this has not been yet updated, I believe, by Deep State. But I think that generally speaking, this is what we should be expecting, a lot of back and forth in this direction. Again, these are open fields and very difficult to hold on to and defend. And so the Russians right now exclusively controlling this area because they're constantly rushing new troops to this direction. And most of the videos that I've seen in the last few weeks are BMPs or BTRs full of Russian soldiers that drop them off behind this railway/tree line close to Stepove and the south of Stepove, closer to the north of Avdiivka. So they just drop him off, and then the Russian soldiers rush through these open fields. And so I've personally seen also in the last few days the Ukrainian army utilize a lot of the Bradleys, FPV drones, and also cluster munitions to be able to essentially destroy these Russian infantry landings close to this railway line here. So it's good to see that the Ukrainians are able to reverse these gains, because now the Russian losses have increased to over 1,000 per day. And this is all thanks to their massive Avdiivka offensive. They're losing hundreds of men per day. And it's good to see that essentially they're wasting a bunch of men and not getting any ground or big breakthroughs as they wanted to. Also in the center of Avdiivka, the Russians are pushing in the center, and they have gotten a little bit of ground in the right side of Kashtanove, so closer to these forested areas, if I remember correctly. But what is important is that the Ukrainians still hold to the heights in Avdiivka. You can see that these hills overlook the lower parts of the center of Avdiivka. And so the Russians can storm all they want, but as long as the Ukrainians can see them from far away and hit them with missiles and FPV drones, they're in trouble here. And you can see that truly the line hasn't changed since February 2022. This is the 2014-2022 line. So essentially the Russians have not gotten a lot of ground for the last 2 months here. So this is good news. And the south has pretty much been the same. The Russians continue trying to push in the south as well. But as far as I'm concerned, the last few updates I gave to you guys, the south has always been very stagnant for the Russians. And they have been very unsuccessful in this direction as well. So overall, the situation is stable in Avdiivka, and the Ukrainian forces are able to do their own counterattacks as well, which is very good. Another update is unfortunately Russian gains in Bakhmut in the south. And so the Russians got a little bit closer to Klishchiivka. You can see it a few days ago, they were further away from Klishchiivka, and they have advanced a little bit in the lower kind of heights overlooking Klishchiivka and Bakhmut and Opitne. So I hope that the Ukrainians will be able to do a small counterattack and reverse these gains. We'll see. Time will tell. And this is an indication, as I've said in the past, that the Russians have picked up the momentum again. And I think this is thanks to over 450,000 Russian soldiers now throughout the front line in Ukraine. And they've added over 170,000 Russian troops in the last few months. So this has allowed Russia to open new offensives and putting a lot of pressure on Ukrainian defenses. As Putin needs some victories for his upcoming elections, he needs to spin this as good PR for his election. So I'm not expecting the Russians to stop anytime soon. The last map update is in Crimea, and there's been a lot of active explosions in Crimea. And this is all thanks to Ukrainian services, secret services, the SBU units that have been active at destroying and damaging some targets in eastern Crimea mainly. So last night, the Ukrainian SBU units struck Feodosia and the oil terminal in Feodosia. And you guys know why, or maybe you don't know why, but Feodosia is a port city. The Russians are most likely transporting cargo ships full of oil and other supplies to Feodosia, and then they're transporting this oil to the front line and these supplies via rail. So the Ukrainians were very smart in destroying or damaging parts of this oil terminal to further reduce Russian capabilities in the south. So this is one great strike, and this was a long-range drone strike. Additionally, in Bahirove, so this is also in eastern Crimea, the Ukrainians struck a helicopter airfield and also radar system. And I believe that the Russians obviously have a lot of radar systems because they want to anticipate Ukrainian strikes, especially on the bridge and on their ships that are located now in Kerch and in the east side of the Black Sea. So one radar system was destroyed, and also an airfield with helicopters that could potentially be damaged as well. So that is another excellent strike. And one strike in the Arabat Spit. In Stilkove, the Ukrainians also managed to destroy a radar system, which is the P-18 Terek system. So overall, this was a very active night and an excellent operation by SBU. What else can I say? So another last update in the Black Sea. Speaking of the Black Sea, Snake Island, close to Snake Island, the Russians were flying an Su-24M aircraft, and it was destroyed by the Ukrainian air defense. Essentially, this Su-24 was about to launch missiles to strike the Odessa region, and so the Ukrainians managed to down one of these aircraft. So another huge air asset that the Russians have lost as well. So that's about all the updates I can give you for the map changes and what happened in the last few hours in Ukraine and days. Now, one last little thing I want to mention is that we talked about Zaluzhnyi yesterday, and I'm happy to have read most of your comments and that most of you do support Zaluzhny's decision to change tactics and suspend the attacks that were suggested by NATO and Ukrainian partners, including the United States. Zaluzhny, as you guys said, didn't have a choice. He had limited resources and still has limited resources, and doing these frontal attacks would be so much waste, and we know that they would be no different from the Russian frontal attacks that we're seeing in Avdiivka. So I'm glad to see that most of you support Zaluzhny and support his decision making. So speaking of Zaluzhny, a report came out also yesterday mentioning that Zaluzhny asked, when Lloyd Austin, the Pentagon chief, came in November to Kiev, he asked him that the United States needed to provide over $350 billion worth of military resources and assistance, and also 17 million shells and different types of ammo to be able to drive out the Russians completely out of Ukraine. And this is a very realistic assessment of what is necessary to drive out the Russians. At this point, the Russians have hundreds of thousands of men in Ukraine. What else do you expect? This is a war that hasn't been seen since World War II in Europe. So yeah, that's what it needs. That's what Ukraine needs to be able to push out and drive out the Russians. And some might say this is a ridiculous demand, and I can understand that. It's a lot of resources and a lot of commitment, but that's what it takes. And Zaluzhny has been right in the past that Ukraine needs far more equipment to be able to have these breakthroughs at this point. So let me know, guys, what you think about Zaluzhny's request. Do you think it's too ridiculous, or do you think that this is exactly what is necessary for Ukraine to win and be able to fully deoccupy the territory? So this takes into account deoccupying Crimea and all the other oblasts in Ukraine. And let's also not forget, a lot of people say it's outrageous. Some of you might say this is outrageous, but the United States spent over $2.35 trillion in Afghanistan. So, and you can say that the results there were pretty bad, right? They pulled out and Taliban came back. So investing into Ukraine, providing a couple $100 billion, yes, it's expensive, but you know that you're going to defeat the Russian military completely. You're going to get rid of evil, and that's going to impact the decision-making of countries like China, Iran, North Korea, Venezuela, to not pull out these types of invasions, because they're not going to feel confident that, they're going to come out victorious when they're going to see the Russian military completely destroyed and the Russian regime collapse. Right? So this is also a message to these dictatorships, these authoritarian governments, that you can't just invade another country and get away with it with concessions. But we'll see what the decision will be from the United States and NATO in the future, because we saw that there's a lot of talks now of stalemates, of pressuring Ukraine into peace deals, and I hope that that's not going to be what's going to stop this conflict. The Ukrainians need to win at their own terms, and I think that the Ukrainians will stop this war when they decide it needs to be stopped. It can't come from exterior pressures, in my opinion, and that's my personal opinion. So let me know, guys, what you think about this, And again, a huge thank you for your support. Again, I forgot to mention, if you guys have any spare dollars, spare money that you want to donate to the Ukrainian military, please donate it to the FPV drones. The Ukrainians and the Ukrainian forces are deeply relying on these FPV drones to be able to strike Russian infantry attacks, whether it be in Avdiivka and Bakhmut. So if you have any spare dollars, please donate them to the Ukrainian military or any other groups of your choosing. The Ukrainians absolutely require this help. So another big thank you for your support for my channel, for Ukraine. Leave me a like, leave me a comment about what you think about Zaluzhnyi's requests for military assistance, and I will see you guys in the next one. Thank you and Slava Ukraini!